almost done. We're almost done. That's why Venus gets so hot. So one of the reasons we haven't sent people to Venus is because it's just so incredibly hot over there that no human being can survive under any kind of current space suits we have. Now, there's a different problem, though. There's a different problem, a reason that we haven't sent many probes and we're never going to send people. If CO2 kept going up and up and up and up and stopped coming down, what gradually happened to the weight of the atmosphere over time? What happened to the weight of the atmosphere on Venus if CO2 continued to go up and stopped coming down? Oop, nobody's trying on this one. If CO2 continued to go up and stopped coming down, would the atmosphere get heavier or lighter over time? Heavier. Yeah, it would get heavier. So, and if the atmosphere is heavier, so basically what I'm getting at is that the atmosphere on Venus is a lot thicker because of this process than the atmosphere on Earth. And that makes the atmosphere a lot heavier. And what that does is it increases air pressure at ground level. Now, the air pressure in Florida, which is roughly sea level, is measured at 1 atmosphere. So what we're all living in right now is a air pressure of approximately 1 atmosphere. If you went someplace with twice the air pressure, it would be 2 atmospheres, and then 3 atmospheres, and then 4 atmospheres, right? Now, does anybody know what happens to the human body if we go to too much pressure? What happens to the human body if we go into too much pressure? Yeah, we die. There's a certain point where the pressure gets so high, it can completely crush the human body. And if you go under enough pressure, you will pass out if you try to go above something like 10 atmospheres, because your body is trying, well, it has a hard time running, and that's good for you because it essentially helps us to avoid going to higher pressures than we can handle. But if you go to beyond 20 atmospheres of pressure, you will die. And if you go much beyond that, you could end up completely crushing your body to essentially a liquid, okay? So you will turn into paste under too much pressure, okay? And again, 20 atmospheres is what kills a human being, okay? So what is the air pressure on the surface of Venus? 90 atmospheres. The pressure on the surface of Venus is 90 atmospheres. So even if it wasn't very hot, if you, as a human being, tried to land on Venus, what would happen to you? Yeah, you're crushed into a paste so badly that we would have a hard time telling that you were a human being. Imagine the worst possible roadkill. And because it is so hot, you would be cooking. So you turn into a paste, and then that paste would cook. Kind of, probably like eggs or something. So, we don't want to send people to Venus. One last thing that comes from all of this is... Oh, somebody is asking if we could be suspended in the air because of this air pressure, kind of like swimming in the ocean, I assume. Because this is a gas, I don't think that we would be able to remain buoyant, because I think that our body would still end up sinking in this material. If it was a liquid, that might have worked, but I think because it is a gas, I think we would still sink all the way down to the ground. I'm not an expert on that, though, so take that with a grain of thought. Now, on Jupiter, we eventually float because eventually you run into the liquid material. And this atmosphere is not a liquid, it's all gas. Okay. Now, good question, though. Good question. Sorry I don't fully have the answer for you there. Now, okay, so remember, we said that there were a lot of clouds on Venus because its entire ocean evaporated. However, one thing you might not know about water is that it is actually very fragile in sunlight, okay? We don't typically think about this because our water doesn't stay in the clouds very long because eventually the water in our clouds will rain back down. But we said that doesn't really happen on Venus. The water would just stay in those clouds a long time ago. And what happens in that situation is that the sunlight is actually able to slowly, over millions of years, break that water down. And remember, water is H2O, so when you break it, essentially you're taking that molecule made of hydrogen and oxygen and splitting it into hydrogen and oxygen. Okay? And that hydrogen and oxygen is going to mix with something else that comes out of those volcanoes. And to help you guys figure out what that other thing is, I want to ask this. Does anybody know what volcanoes smell like? Actually, I'll tell you that. Volcanoes frequently smell like rotten eggs because of the gas that's coming out of them. Does anybody know what gas coming out of volcanoes makes them smell like rotten eggs? Sulfur. That is correct. Sulfur. So, sulfur is coming out of volcanoes. And normally that's not too much of an issue. But on Venus, because you had all of this broken water in the atmosphere, all of this hydrogen and oxygen, some of that hydrogen and oxygen, a lot of the hydrogen would escape to space, but some of that hydrogen and oxygen would be able to combine with the sulfur and form a new molecule. And that new molecule is H2SO4. H2SO4. Actually, I'll write that down. It forms H2SO4. So even though the clouds on Venus started as water clouds, probably, because of combining with the material from the volcanoes and being broken down by the sun, the clouds have now all become H2SO4. Now, does anybody know what the other name for H2SO4 is? Actually, somebody already wrote it. It's called sulfuric acid. So the clouds on Venus are made of sulfuric acid. And that is, here we go. So there are no more water clouds on this planet, just sulfuric acid. Now, do you want to mess around with sulfuric acid? Yeah, absolutely not. That is a pretty strong acid. Another name for it is car battery acid. So the acid that makes up these really thick clouds on Venus is made of the same stuff that is in car batteries, okay? Now, do you want to stick your hand in a car battery? Does anybody know what would happen if you open up a car battery and stick your hand down into those chemicals? Just like, just put your hand in there for a little while. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to your hand in that situation? Oh yeah, your hand would start to blister immediately, and if you left it in pure sulfuric acid for long enough, it will completely eat away your flesh. It's going to eat you away. It might take a little while, although it's going to hurt immediately. But yeah, you're gonna, if you swam in a pool of sulfuric acid, you will turn into a skeleton. And I'm not a sulfuric acid expert. I'm not sure if it will eat away at your bone. It probably eats away at your bones too. So, do you want to hang out in those clouds? No. And here's another thing. Does anybody know what a fog is? Does anybody know what fog is? What's a fog? Fog is clouds near the ground. That's correct. If fog is clouds, and the clouds on Venus are made of sulfuric acid, what is the fog that you might sometimes have to walk around with on Venus made out of? Yep, the fog itself is made out of sulfuric acid also. So why do we never send anybody to Venus? Because it is a terrible place. There's acid everywhere. It's super hot. The air itself can crush your body. It's just we're never going to send people to Venus. And I think that's kind of funny because Venus is named after one of the Roman gods, just like all of the other planets. Does anybody know what Venus is the god of in Roman mythology? Here's a hint. I think you guys can figure it out. Yeah, the hint was that the Greek name was Aphrodite, and it's the goddess of love and beauty. So based on that, a lot of people, before we knew what the surface of Venus was like, some people thought that Venus was going to be a tropical paradise planet. Why else would we name it the goddess of beauty? Is this a tropical paradise planet? No. No, it's not. It's not a tropical paradise planet. It is the exact opposite of a tropical paradise planet. It essentially is a hell planet, right? It's like a cartoon Bugs Bunny version of hell, okay? There's volcanoes everywhere. It's super hot. There's acid everywhere. You die just from being there. You would die long before you hit the ground, okay? The pressure would be enough to destroy your body over a mile above the surface. Just please don't visit Venus.